Good afternoon to our viewers in Germany and good morning to our viewers in the United States. Hello, I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's Kaffeepause. Each week, we check in with a journalist based in Germany to talk about the news stories behind the headlines. And today, we're joined by Malte Lehming from the Berlin daily Der Tagesspiegel. Malte, it's always great to see you. Herzlich willkommen.
Thank you for having me, and good morning to New York.
So, Malte, it's sort of become a tradition with you when you join us for the Kaffeepause for you to share some of the leading headlines from some of the leading papers with us. What's on the front pages today?
Let me just get some of these papers. I will start with today's Handelsblatt, which is the business daily in Germany. And I don't know if you can read it. Kein Freibrief für die Politik, meaning there's no carte blanche for policy. The Handelsblatt has an interview with the president of the Supreme Court, and this is referring to the decision by the Supreme Court that the decision about the so-called Heizungsgesetz, the home heating law, has to be postponed because the parliamentarians were not given enough time to discuss it. So, which is a huge burden for the government, but we will talk about that later on. Then we have a neuer Sprengstoff vor dem NATO-Gipfel, new explosives for the NATO summit. This is the left-wing Tageszeitung, and they are referring to the cluster munition controversy, which the Biden administration is considering to deliver to the Ukraine, but European partners have their restrictions. And the conservative Die Welt says the NATO-Gipfel, der Bluff der Bundesregierung. So NATO summit, the government is bluffing. This is a discussion about the 2% contribution to the military budget, which the Germany pledged for decades to fulfill, but it's right now just have 1.6, 1.7%. It's not fulfilling this demand. So, and then we have our own paper, the Tagesspiegel. Es ist etwas im Gang. Steinmeier sorgt sich wegen starker FDP Deutschland. So, the president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, is concerned about the strong showing of the right-wing and right populist and right extremist AfD about Germany. He met with some politicians to discuss this, and so he's interfering into domestic policy with that. So, but this basically are the headlines.
Those are quite a range of headlines, but it fits very nicely with the topics that we had looked at that we'd like to discuss today. And so I think, what we could do maybe is start with a conversation about domestic topics and domestic politics, and then turn to the NATO summit and what to expect there. Certainly over the last week or two, it has seemed a little chaotic, at least from the outside, in terms of what's been going on in Berlin as everybody got ready for the summer break. And as you pointed out, from the headline in the Handelsblatt, it became clear that the ruling coalition won't be able to get the green energy law approved by Parliament before the summer break as it had hoped to. As some of our viewers and listeners might remember, this was something that the government had tried to get pushed through earlier in the year, and then the hope was, let's at least get this done before the summer break. Now it's going to have to wait until the fall. Can you share with us a little bit what sort of disputes have been going on that have contributed to the months of delay behind this controversial heating bill?
I mean, yeah, it basically is a disaster for the government, what has happened. This project, and I can't remember any kind of topic that we are talking about now since months and months about the home heating law, which basically says that new heaters don't have to be heaters from oil and gas, but replaced by renewable energies if they newly installed. There is a lot of misinformation circulating around this law saying that everybody now has to act in the beginning of next year, but it just says that new heaters has to comply with this kind of law. But it's regarded as very costly for the consumers. So people were afraid that it will put a financial burden on themselves. But basically, what's behind it is a clash between, let's say, freedom of your own act, what you can do, the FDP, the Liberal Party line, and the Green Party line, that you have a climate responsibility which you have to fulfill. So it's symbolized in these two figures: Robert Habeck, the vice chancellor of Germany and responsible for business and climate change, against Christian Lindner from the Liberal Party, who always says we have to be open for new inventions and we can't exclude oil and gas. We don't know what is happening, and we are putting too much burden on the consumers. So this led to, I think, some polls saying that at least maybe 3/4 of the Germans are against this new law. With all the, and in between, there was a struggle in between the government, because we are talking about the Ampelregierung, the traffic light government consisting of the SPD and Greens and Liberals, and they are fighting about this law even more than the opposition was fighting against this law. That looked terrible, and they really and hard try to get rid of this topic before the summer break begins. But then the Supreme Court sets in and said the parliamentarians were not given enough time to discuss it. So you are not allowed to discuss and vote upon this new law before the summer break. So this means that the whole discussion will continue through the summer break, even though some of them might be on holiday, but the whole discussion will continue.
So obviously this is not great for the governing coalition, because it shows real strife within the government, as you said, largely between the Free Democrats and the Greens. But it seems as if this is also a big topic between the government and the opposition, because it was also, I think, one of the opposition leaders, Thomas Heilmann, from the CDU, who filed an emergency petition against the vote, which helped contribute to the Constitutional Court being brought into this. So it's not just affecting the coalition. It seems to be a big topic in political circles as it is. How much of a conflict is this between the government and the opposition as well?
I think it is very big conflict. I mean, the opposition smells they can act on something and made the government look weak and internally driven by fights against each other. And so a badly formed law should not be put into effect in such a short time. That's what they're saying. And I think the opposition, I think it's the first topic they really found something to jump into it. So, but it is, I mean, the whole energy discussion, starting with the dependency on Russian gas and oil, getting rid of this, then closing down the nuclear power plants, which a majority of Germans are opposing, saying, let's keep that open for a while until we know how to get all the gas and oil. And now a new climate-driven or climate policy-driven law that might put a lot of burden to the consumers, that brought the, how do you say, the Fass zum Überlaufen, the straw breaks the camel's back. I think that was this. So so this is, and the opposition just now smells their opportunity.
So, what role does the chancellor play in all of this? It seemed, watching these developments over the past few months, as if Scholz sort of stood by and watched Robert Habeck, the Minister of Economic Affairs, take all the heat, no pun intended, for this law and for the difficulties with the law. He ultimately did intervene, and it seemed as if the three coalition partners had a deal, but it came very, very late. Should Scholz have stepped in earlier? Is there anything you think that he could have done to sort of avoid this, I guess, public scene over the heating law?
That's what a lot of people are saying. He should have interfered much earlier. On the other hand, I very much doubt that he was familiar with the details of the law, given all the other topics he is dealing with right now. So, and what you do, if you side yourself either with the Liberals or the Greens, does that bring more stability to a very fragile coalition? Or does this lead to more mistrust against each other? And now Scholz is on Lindner's side or is on Habeck's side, and so on and so on. What he's trying to do is to pull the strings from the back, not being in the public as much as he can, to talk to the opponents, Lindner and Habeck, behind closed doors. That doesn't work, actually, as we see it right now, because we have a disaster now in the Bundestag. But that's what he does, because it's very hard to, if you too early side with one side, then you're, might risk the stability of your own Ampel coalition.
I mean, I think we all knew that this was going to be a challenge for Scholz, leading a government made up of three parties, and with some very different factions within at least two of those parties, the Greens and the Social Democrats. But do you think that the chancellor is doing enough to build consensus within the governing coalition along the way, or are there other things that he could be doing to try to achieve that consensus?
I very much doubt that there is so many other things he can do. Many people say he's not talking enough to people. But it's a very, very fragile coalition between, and Liberals and Greens are on the opposing side in many, many terms. I mean, what works in his favor is that the huge topics, the Zeitenwende topics, the 100 billion euro and the engagement in weapon delivery to the Ukraine, and all these things, they are undisputed, and most people are, basically the parties at least, are on board with this. Even climate change is something that the Liberals right now say, we want climate change too, and the CDU is saying we want climate change too, and we could even be more radical than the government coalition, and so on and so on. So climate change is a consensus topic, like the stand in the Ukraine conflict, and so on and so on. So I think the huge topics of German policy are fixed and are settled. The problem is the inward system that the Greens and Liberals are trying to play to their own constituency sometimes, and that brings a lot of troubles into the government. I doubt if Scholz can do a lot of things about it.
Mm-hmm. But before we move on to another topic, let me come back to something that you said earlier, that there's been a fair amount of disinformation around the heating bill. What efforts are being undertaken to deal with that misinformation and to make sure that the public is better informed? Yes, these heating systems might be expensive to install and might lead to greater expenses. But as you pointed out before, it's not that all heating systems need to be replaced with these new systems. Right. It's more that new heating systems have to use renewables rather than fossil fuels.
Right, but the first misinformation is that from January 1st next year, all heating systems have to be replaced. This is just untrue. This is false information, because the law says whenever you install a new one, that should not be fueled by oil and gas, but with 60 or 65% renewables. The cost that was added upon is partly governed by the government, partly paid for by the government. So if you look at it in detail, it just sounds, to my opinion, quite rational. But it was open to attacks like the Heizungshammer. That was the Bild Zeitung saying, the tabloids are saying that that's the hammer of Habeck, and against him, and the consumers will suffer, and that's what climate policy will lead us to, and so on and so on. There was a lot of misinformation about it. And then the next argument is we have to be much more open to new developments on the energy market. That's what the FDP is saying all the time. Yes, to be open, I think nobody is disputing that you have to be open, but it doesn't mean that you solely have to rely on renewables. But the majority of your energy should come from renewables, not everything. So there is a quite of openness into the law itself. The fight during the summer will be, the CDU right now is saying we have throw this law away. We are willing to work with the government for just a quite new law about it. But the government essentially just want to, if they even want to change something, just small parts of the law and not going into the discussion all over again.
Mm-hmm. So, as you've mentioned, there's been a lot of political infighting within the coalition. There's been a lot of tension between the coalition government and the leading opposition party. Just over the weekend, Bild Zeitung published a new INSA poll, according to which some 70% of those polled are dissatisfied with the governing coalition made up of the three parties. This is the lowest level of government support, or the highest level of lack of support since this government came into power in late 2021. What explains that? Is this due to the political infighting and some of these laws, or are there other factors at play that we should be watching?
I think both is correct. This is the root cause is because all the polls start to go up from June on, and that's about the time the government looked quite amateurishly and not professional in what they are doing. For example, we just talked about the home heating law. There is another disaster with the Selbstbestimmungsgesetz, the so-called self-determination law, which should make it easier for people to change gender and name. But now they found out because of police intervention that criminals might do that again and exploit that and just change their name quite quickly, saying from now on I'm not a man or a woman anymore, but a trans man or trans woman. So then they stopped it, just because this was a law they tried to vote upon before the summer comes. So everything looks quite amateurishly. It's not exactly the content of the law which is disputed, but the way it is presented to the public. So the AfD, I think, if you want to discuss the broader picture, then I would say we had quite a lot of topics in Germany where people with dissenting views were not represented by parties. That started with the refugee crisis in 2015, 2016, with the influx of refugees. And because basically all parties then to that time presented in the parliament were in favor of the Willkommenskultur. Then we had the COVID-19 epidemic, where basically all parties are in favor of the things that had to be done, even though today, even Karl Lauterbach, the Minister of Health, is saying we made a couple of mistakes with the closure of schools, and kindergarten was too long, and the playgrounds were closed, and so on. So all this didn't have to be, but that's what the so-called Querdenker and AfD guys were saying all along. So they were feeling that let's give them the weapon delivery to the Ukraine. There is a huge consensus. Yes, we have to deliver weapons, but Germans, as you might know, they are always peace-loving, and there is a 50% majority saying we have to intensify dialogue and Waffenstillstand and all these things. So there are a number of people who are then saying, okay, if the right-wingers were saying that all along and nobody listened to that time, after a while they did. This might contribute to the broader picture, saying, okay, let's vote for them. Plus the amateurishly executed policy by the government leads to a deep sort of dissatisfaction with the government, with politics and government.
So let's talk a little bit more about this uptick in support for the AfD, for the Alternative für Deutschland. As you mentioned, this was on the front page of the Tagesspiegel with some comments from the federal president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier. We've seen a number of polls in recent weeks that have shown an increase in support for the AfD, particularly in Germany's eastern states. This has come about, at least in part, because this group has been protesting or advocating against the heating law and other climate protection measures, but it's also been looking for the weak spots in the government and taking advantage of those. How much of a threat do you think the AfD actually is, or how much of this is people sort of vocalizing a protest at this point?
I think it could be a huge threat, not especially to democracy, but to the whole political system in Germany. Given the fact that on a federal level, I think the polls saying the AfD is the second strongest party, coming after the CDU, before the SPD, before the Greens. And much more alarming are the polls in the eastern part of Germany. We have 3 elections I think in Sachsen and Thüringen and what else? I think in Brandenburg next year. If all parties have a so-called Brandmauer, a wall against working together with the AfD, but if you have an AfD with 35%, you might have to build let's say, Mozambique coalition consisting of SPD, CDU, Greens, and Liberals against an AfD, and that makes you look weak in a way, because it seems that you have to concentrate all your powers against just one party to keep them out of power. And but on the other hand, breaking this taboo with working the AfD is unthinkable of. So this is putting the parties, confronting the parties with a dilemma. Either you stick to the Brandmauer, to the wall against the AfD, but then you might look weak because you have the biggest coalition against just one party, or you're breaking this wall, but then you pave their way to power. This is the biggest danger I can see for next year to come. We don't have an election on federal level, but especially in the East, that could be damaging.
But what about in October? There are state elections in Bavaria and Hessen. And while the AfD is obviously polling much higher in the East, and we should look ahead to next year in the 3 state elections that you mentioned, is there concern that the AfD might have a stronger showing in Bavaria and Hessen this fall?
A stronger showing, yes. It might be that they keep the level they have right now, but this would not lead to disruption of Bavarian or Hessen policy, but because their systems are quite strong enough. I see the bigger threat the year after that in the former east of Germany.
One of our viewers is curious about how the recent events in France are being followed in Germany, particularly by refugees and migrants. And since the issue around refugees is an important one in Germany, is this something that people are paying attention to and watching, sort of the radicalization, if you will, of the right and the riots that we've seen?
Yeah, I mean the developments in France were watched very closely, but not as much as you put it into context in the German policy discussion. We have a huge burden with migrants and refugees. More than 1 million came this year, and people on a communal level are complaining that the burden is too high and they can't come up with everything like this. But we haven't seen something like the riots in France, because I think the circumstances in France are a little bit different to what we have in Germany. These are not rights that came so much in France from migrants and refugees as for French citizens. Most of them were born in banlieue, and they are French citizens according to French law, and for years and decades. So I think it is not seen as a rebellion of migrants and refugees as much as I wouldn't say displaced person, but people in very difficult circumstances, rebellious against police force. Do we have excessive police force in Germany? Is that, I mean, it was the same in the USA, Black Lives Matter, and so on and so on. There was no wave then coming to Germany just watching that. So I think the similarities between the United States and France are much higher than between France and Germany in this.
Yeah. So it seems, from everything that we've talked about today, that Olaf Scholz sort of has his hands full with domestic politics at the moment. But at the same time, he also has to deal with foreign policy and international affairs. He will get a little bit of a break from domestic issues over the next 2 days because he's headed to Vilnius in Lithuania, along with a number of other world leaders for the 2-day NATO summit. And the big topic for discussion is going to be whether or not NATO can make long-term commitments to Ukraine's security, and whether or not a plan for Ukraine to join NATO can be put on the table. How is this issue being followed in Germany?
Very closely. And the last thing that Scholz said is that he is very much in common with the US President Joe Biden, saying no to a NATO, yes, to bring the Ukraine into NATO right now. But I think the biggest question, what kind of security arrangements or promises can the West give to Ukraine that the need of the Ukraine is being fulfilled, and the Baltics and some Eastern European states who are all very strongly favoring a NATO membership of Ukraine as soon as possible, while Western countries, I think, like the USA and Germany, are on the break, saying yes to insurance, but no to a NATO membership in the foreseeable future, at least as long as the military incursions are going on. So, because if we would be in favor of a NATO membership right now, then we had to be involved with NATO troops into Ukraine because of Article 5, the NATO treaty. So I think 3 topics. The NATO membership is the most important topic in Vilnius. The next 2 are the sending of cluster munition, which the Joe Biden government is supposedly doing, and the membership of Sweden. Turkey is still bargaining for the membership of Sweden and trying to make linkages between how Sweden treats Kurdish organizations, and maybe even with EU membership. We are willing to say yes to a NATO membership as long as the EU opens the new chapter with Turkey of the EU membership. So I would suggest, I expect a show of unity. That's what the NATO still is able to do, and I'm very happy about it, because nobody expects that to a delicate topic like the war of Russia, the aggressive war of Russia and Ukraine, would a unity of NATO would be as long enduring as it is right now. I think that's a huge accomplishment of the Western alliance. And I expect a lot of bargaining behind the scenes. Some weapon deliveries might even go to Turkey, F-16 and other things like that. And security arrangements on the line, like what we have with Israel and other countries as well. So strong security agreements, and maybe a path to NATO, which will be mentioned, but with a lot of conditions attached after the war ended, and so on and so on. There might be deliberations about that topic and so on. So that's what I'm
I mean,
expecting.
there's in terms of a path to membership, there are still some major concerns about democratic reforms that are necessary in Ukraine.
Right.
That would be a precondition, and so there needs to be progress there. But it was interesting to listen to you talk about the show of unity that you expect to see over the next 2 days, and that's something that NATO is good for. One of the analysts that I was reading today or yesterday said, watch for the family photo, right? When all of the world leaders have their picture taken together, and see whether or not Volodymyr Zelensky is part of that family photo or not, because that might send a different signal from if he is not there. So we'll have to see sort of how those talks play out. But I'd like to ask you maybe to share with us a little bit more how much of a spoiler you think Turkey can actually be at the summit and in the process moving forward. Obviously, Turkey has been blocking Sweden's membership in NATO. I found it interesting that this new tie is being made to potential EU membership for Turkey. It's not something that I had thought Turkey was seriously considering still at this point. Do you think that that's a real bargaining chip that Erdogan knew in his new term in government is actually thinking about playing?
Turkey became stronger during the war in the Ukraine. We're talking about some agreements he was able to bring with Russia and Ukraine and the UN, and it seems that he has some good vibes as well with Zelensky, as well with Putin, and that makes him a strong figure in that. And he is in constant dialogue with these parties. And so, yes, I would say he is in a very strong position to bargain. And he wants to show his constituency in Turkey that he is the strong man, and then that he can achieve something. It's not about Turkish economy. That looks still bad. Inflation is high, and so on and so on. But on the international parquet, he is the strong man. And if you're talking about the family photo in the last, look at where he stands. That will be maybe at least as important as where Zelensky is, and if Zelensky is on the photo as well. I think he is in a strong position, and he will achieve something for his country, at least something that he can present to his constituency in Turkey. It's not that, it's not that Turkish security is much threatened by some small Turkish groups in Sweden. This is symbolic. Most of these things are symbolic measure. Not symbolic is military delivery, the F-16 we were talking about that he definitely wants to have from the United States, and what he might get. So yes, these are the realities on the ground.
And so we'll certainly have to watch that over the next few days and sort of in the coming weeks and months indeed. But let's maybe wrap up our conversation sort of where we started. You shared two headlines with us, one from the left-leaning Tageszeitung Taz about the cluster munitions, and the other from the right of center Die Welt about the NATO summit as a government bluff because of the 2% promise that had been made by NATO member states in 2014. How is the debate over the cluster munitions playing out in Germany? How is that being followed? I mean, obviously, we've seen a tremendous shift in the German mindset with the war in Ukraine, and a general willingness by the public to support Ukraine, not just financially, but also militarily, so that it can defend itself against Russia. Does the addition of cluster munitions on the battlefield sort of change that calculus or the general support for continuing to support Ukraine?
I don't think it will change the general support, but my feeling is, I have no hard facts about it, but my feeling from conversations with colleagues and people on the street is that cluster munition, because if you see how cluster munition works, and for sure every news program in Germany were showing these pictures when the decision was made, and brought witness stories about how terrible it is even after the war, where all the mines are on the ground and people are losing their legs and so on and so on. So it is seen as, no, we don't support it, and we are glad that the whole of Europe, I think, don't support sending cluster munitions to it. But I think the strategy of the government will be, let's not talk about it too much, because we don't do it. There's nothing we owe our own population to, no explanation for that. And what the United States is doing, that's basically their business. And given the fact that even the Ukraine and Russia are using cluster munitions right now, so it's not a new invention of a new weapon, I could guess the discussion will boil down. But I think the majority of Germans are against that. I don't think it will change the core of the dynamic that, yes, we have to support Ukraine because Russia is the aggressionist side. That is still the majority opinion, but there are tremendous reservations against cluster munitions.
And then the other headline that you shared, of course, had to do with the 2%. We've heard some strong commitments from the chancellor and from his new defense minister, Pistorius, that Germany will meet its 2% pledge. That we've also seen a tremendous dedication of resources to defense spending, even if that money has not sort of flowed yet in the way that many people had expected it to. What do you read into Die Welt's headline that this is a government bluff and that Germany will not meet its 2% pledge, or do you think that it will come closer to meeting that pledge?
The question is, when will Germany meet that pledge? Definitely not this year, and I doubt next year, and maybe not the year after that. If it comes to 2026, yes, it might be, because there's always more that they're willing to spend. Where do you put the 100 billion euro that were pledged by the chancellor into it? Into the budget of the military or not? It is officially excluded. It's not part of the budget. But the population is saying it's not just the 2%, but on top of that, we are spending 100 billion euros for the military. And the effect is, and we just had the budgetary discussions in Parliament, that some, for example, the Elterngeld, the parental allowance money will have to be reduced, and maybe other things. Though if more and more people think about making this connection between spending more money to the military and spending less money on basically needed things for health, for education, for children, and so on and so on, that might change the dynamic of the discussion, and saying, let's not spend too much on it, and not reducing too much of the money we're spending for other parts.
So, Malte, let me ask you a closing question from one of our viewers. It was reported over the last couple of days that a group of former U.S. national security experts, including Richard Haass, who's the outgoing president of the Council on Foreign Relations, met with high-level Russian figures, including the foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov. Our viewer is curious whether this was reported widely in the German media, whether it was covered in the German media, and what the reaction was to this meeting.
Because the first question is no. The second answer is, the first answer is no. The second answer is no, there was no reaction. Yeah. I found that very interesting. And I remember that the general, what's his name? The highest military general, Milley.
Milley, yeah.
Is always saying there will be a stalemate, and after the stalemate, we might need to discuss these things. No, any kind of diplomatic initiative or figuring out if there is any diplomatic possibility that can be faced, is not discussed right now in German media. I find this a little bit too hesitant if you compare it to, for example, to the American media, where much more open discussion, even though they are supporting, basically the majority is supporting the West in its conflict with Russia. But thinking every development from the end needs to figure out how this will be possible. Do we really have to wait until Ukraine reconquered or liberated all of its territory before we begin any kind of discussion? This is a very hard question. But the problem is, whenever you raise the question, the answer will be, this is exactly the question Putin wants you to discuss about. So this is sometimes the answer that you can't really discuss these things about because you're facing this answer.
Well, Malte, it is always great to talk with you, and I really appreciate your taking the time and making the time to share your insights with all of us. I wish you a wonderful summer and look forward to being in touch again in the fall and having you back for another Kaffeepause.
Thank you. I would be delighted to. Have a great day.
Herzlichen Dank.